Boatworks Today is a viewer-supported show. To learn more on how you can get involved and watch extended ad-free versions of these videos, please visit our website, boatworkstoday.com, and click on the top of the heading where it says Support This Show. Thank you. What is going on, everybody? I hope you are all doing well. My name is Andy with Boatworks Today, and let's get started. So a couple of years ago, I put out a video that was something along the lines of, how to make a part for your boat off of a mold or, something like that. And at that time, I was making a hatch for a Typhoon or a Cape Dory Typhoon 19. And while I was recording it, my main focus was for actually building the part. I didn't really focus on building the mold because, to me, it seemed kind of straightforward, and I didn't think it'd be really interesting. So I didn't bother recording it. Well, it turns out that was a mistake because that was by far the most, the most asked question is, how did you make the mold? So fast forward 2 years to today, and right now I had a request from actually one of my Patreon supporters to ask me if I could duplicate a hatch for his boat that had gone missing. Ironically enough, it was for another Cape Dory, but this one is for a Cape Dory 28. So here's the original mold off the 19 that I did from 2 years ago, and here's the more recent mold for the Cape Dory 28. So this is what this video is going to be focusing on, is how to build this mold. Now, luckily the owner of this boat still had one hatch that he could send me to use as a template. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it down on a 1/2-inch piece of plywood. And using my angled angle finder thing, I'm going to go around the edges of this hatch just to see if the edges are actually square or if they kind of flare out a little bit at an angle. Now, technically, I know this is called a bevel gauge, but angled angle finder is just a lot more fun to say, so that's what I'm going to go with. And as you can see here, there is a little bit of a flare, so good thing I checked it. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that I'm building this mold around the outside dimensions of this hatch, so it is going to be very important that all the angles, everything on the outside dimensions are perfectly matched, because we're building this hatch from the outside in. So because the sides of this hatch kind of flare out a little bit, I'm coming in and I'm using a square and butting that up to what would be the top edge and then making a little mark on the plywood. That's going to make sure that this base is slightly oversized, which is actually what we need, because in a little bit when I start laying in the glass and the gel coat to reinforce this mold, that's going to take up some space, so I need to have a little bit of extra room in there. With the marks on the plywood giving us our general shape, I'm going to use a straight edge, essentially just connect the dots, and then we're going to head over to the table saw and get this thing cut out. Now, while I was at the table saw getting the bevels for this base cut off, I also ripped 4 more pieces, which are eventually going to be making up the sides. Now, at this point, I'm not concerned about making sure that the tops are exactly, where they need to be. I oversized them on purpose so that after the sides are attached to the base, then I can come in, trace around the top of the hatch, cut them off, and that, that'll give me a real good shape. After a little bit of messing around, going back and forth, making sure that the sides were all cut and fit properly, now I can actually start, screwing everything together. And there really is no right or wrong way to do this. I mean, on this one, I think I'm going to throw in a screw, maybe every 6 inches, give or take, and I'll reinforce the sides a little bit more. But, for the most part, it just needs to be held together. I mean, we're going to be laying glass and resin in here, so, that's really what's going to be creating the strength of this shell. But for right now, we just need to make sure that the sides just don't blow off when we're laying our glass in. With everything screwed together, now I can start making my marks as far as where I need to cut these sides down, or to match the angle on this hatch. So just to give me a little bit of extra wiggle room, I'm using some tongue depressors. I'm using either 2 or 3, and that's just going to add anywhere from a 1/16 to, well, not quite an 1/8 inch of extra height. Again, just for a little bit of extra wiggle room here. After trimming the sides over at the bandsaw, this is what we got. I should probably zoom in here. Here we go. One of my favorite sayings is that sometimes it's just better to be lucky. And I kind of lucked out here a little bit. But here, all the way around the hatch, I've got a nice, a nice little gap between the hatch and the mold. I'd say it's consistently about an 1/8 inch gap all the way around, which is absolutely perfect. And in a couple minutes, you're going to see why that spacing is very important. Remember what I said a second ago about being lucky? Well, here we go. This is a perfect example. The corners of the corners on this hatch are the exact same radius as the end of one of these little mixing sticks or tongue depressors. So easy peasy. I like that. And for getting this radius set in here, I'm going to be using my good old standby AdTech P14. Now here I'm using a black hardener, but you could use any hardener. It could be purple. They don't make a purple hardener here, but if they did, you could certainly use it. I guess what I'm getting at, it really doesn't matter what color you're using, as long as it's not old and it still works. I mean, if you wanted to, you could even use thickened epoxy or even Bondo. I mean, anything will work for the most part. So here I'm just packing in the filler with using the mixing stick, which is giving me the radius that I need. And then I'm coming in and just kind of striking off or removing any of the excess that kind of spills over the side. Do that on all 4 corners, and then we're going to let it sit for maybe, 15, 20 minutes, let it bake. And then it's time to move on to the next step, which is laying the glass. So for inside the mold, I'm just going to be using 1.5 ounce chop strand matting. I'm not going to use any other type of glass. The reason I'm using the chop strand is because after it's wetted out, this is the glass that's going to give you the smoothest surface, I guess, after it cures. And since this is the mold side of this project, it's not the part. This has nothing to do with the part yet. But since this is the mold, having a nice smooth surface is just going to make a lot less work on the back end. After we actually pull a part out of here, the smoother it comes out, the less wet sanding and polishing we're going to have to do. So anything I can do now that's going to mean less sanding down the road, I am all over that one. So in total, I'm going to be laying 2 layers of chop strand, 2 on the bottom as well as 2 layers around all the 4 sides. And if I do this right, each layer is going to be overlapping. So that's hopefully going to mean that I'm going to have a nice, consistent, even layer all the way around. I'm not going to have any humps or high ridges that I'm going to have to knock down. So let's just kind of hope this works. So here's a little bit of a tip. As you know, I always like to tear my chop strand rather than cut it. So you may be asking yourself, well, why did I just run a razor blade over this chop strand and then now I'm tearing it? So here's the deal. Trying to tear out thin strips of chop strand is just a nightmare. It doesn't work. It always tears in half. But if you come in and you lightly score it first with the razor blade, you're not cutting it, but you're just kind of lightly scoring it. Now you're able to come back and tear it without the chop strand pulling apart. So, stick that one in your back pocket and remember it for next time. Are you ready to get sticky? I am pretty sure that there are going to be some questions about how I was able to get a radius along the bottom edge. You can see where I'm working right in here. And honestly, because I didn't use any of the AdTech, I only used the AdTech in the corners. Right now, I'm using this roller to establish that slight radius. The roller that I'm using, I believe it's a 3/8 inch diameter roller. And when I'm working into these corners, the roller basically establishes that radius. The glass just holds the shape. Now, there's a lot of resin in these corners, which I can tell you is not an ideal layup. But this is not a repair. This is making a mold for essentially a one-off part. So even though it may be a little heavy in the corners, or along those bottom edges with the resin, it'll work perfectly fine for this application. So I'm going to work this material for a little bit longer just to make sure that the shape and the glass and everything is where I want it to be, nice and smooth. And then we're going to put it to bed for the night. Tomorrow is another day. Since I typically use laminating resin for all of my glass work, and this was no exception, I still need to come back and somehow top coat this material so that the glass fully cures. My normal go-to is either PVA or, and a lot more oftentimes than not, I'll actually top coat the glass with gel coat, because the gel coat is going to fill in the pores of the glass, or the texture of the glass. It's going to help me to get a smoother surface faster. Now, the one part about this particular gel coat that I'm using now is that it is not a laminating gel coat. This already has the wax mixed in. This is what you want to call a finishing gel coat. So I'm going to lay this in really, really thick. I want it to completely fill the glass so that when I come back and sand the following day, I have a nice smooth surface. Now I am going to have to come back and touch up the sides just one more time, just because the gel coat isn't going to stick on a vertical surface. But one application on the base, and then I'm going to let it cure. It is the following day, and I've already come in and trimmed off the excess glass that was sticking out the top of the mold here. So gel coat set up, I got the excess trimmed off, so now it's just time to start smoothing this all down. And the sides I'm going to have to sand by hand, but the bottom, the large area, I'm going to be able to hit almost all of that with the sander. And I'm going to be knocking everything down using 220 grit. After getting everything sanded down, the bottom came out really nice, but the sides were still a bit rough. So I'm going to mix up some more of the AdTech P14, and then using I think it's a 6-inch trowel, I'm just going to basically smooth out all the sides. It's kind of like laying drywall, I guess, smoothing between two different panels. So a little bit of a plan B, but that's all right. So after a little bit of sanding to smooth everything out and a wipe down with some acetone, now it's time to finally go on to our last step for finishing this mold, which is going to be spraying this entire mold down with, I think I did 3 coats of PVA, or polyvinyl alcohol. Now, if you're not set up for spraying, there is another way that you can approach this, and it wouldn't be using PVA, but it would be using what's called a mold release wax. Now, the only difference between the PVA and the wax is that here I'm going to be spraying 3 light coats. If you're going to be using the wax, you'd probably want to apply 6 or 7 light coats, letting it dry and then buffing it out, after each coat. So that would not be one of those situations where less is more. You want to make sure that you've got a good, solid foundation of that wax so that you can pop your part back out of the mold. Unfortunately, the light coming through the window kind of blew out the exposure on my camera, so you can't see real well. I even had 2 different cameras running, and they were both blown out. So anyways, I did my best. But here, again, like I said, I'm going to be spraying 3 light coats. I'm going to let it sit for probably an hour between each coat. So after letting this PVA dry overnight, our mold is now done. It is ready to start casting apart, but that is going to have to wait for the next video. So as always, I want to thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please give me a thumbs up and share this on social stuff. I don't really understand how all that works, but if you do, I would really appreciate the help. So if you have any questions, comments, please leave those down below. And until next time, thanks for watching.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.